Chapter 17. An unsettling notoriety. Too few hours after I'd crawled into my bed, stiff and chilled to the very bone, Charlotte tried to waken me. I protested by telling her I'd do for myself and then tucked my head under my pillow to sleep a few minutes longer. Eventually, with my hair brushed as well as I could manage and wearing my thickest stockings over sore feet, I came down for breakfast. "Good morning, Granny Jane." I kissed her soft, rosy cheek. "Hello, Charlotte. I apologize for being a bear earlier." I kissed her, too. If Constable Beck kept his vow to report on last night's encounter, this might be the last kiss of mine that Charlotte ever accepted. Granny Jane rose early before the sun and was always beautifully dressed for breakfast. Today she wore the pale violet, its bodice embroidered with tiny dark blooms. "That's my favorite dress of yours, Granny." I took a boiled egg from the warming basket and 2 pieces of toast from the rack. Granny Jane read the newspaper while she ate, just as if she were a man. She did not pay attention to what was said around her until she had absorbed the news of the day. Papa had been the same way, unapproachable until all world disasters had been digested along with his morning trout. Charlotte was reading Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen for the 99th time. It's an amazing book. When you get older, you'll have to read it, okay? Including all the other things that Jane Austen wrote. Often I brought Sherlock Holmes to keep me company until Mummy showed up. But I'd forgotten my book this morning, what with trying to think up a story to explain where my slippers had gone and anticipating a visit from Constable Beck. Being naughty and deceitful certainly put clever thoughts out of one's head. "Wait, what does that say?" I'd caught sight of bold print on the front page of Granny's Torquay voice. "Mermaid Room Murder. Is Dancing Spinster a poisoner?" "Granny, what has happened with Miss Mary Ann?" I leaned over and rattled the corner of the newspaper. "Granny Jane, please tell me." She pulled the voice out of my reach. "Have we sunk so low that my grandchild is snatching things at the table?" "No, I'm sorry. I could not risk having her miffed on a day when there was likely to be plenty more reason than bad table manners." I waited 3 long seconds. "But I do wish to know." "When I'm finished." Granny Jane made a show of turning the page, lining up the edges and folding the thin, rustling paper into a rectangle small enough to read. I thought of Leonard's supply of rolled paper kindling, yesterday's stories going up in smoke each evening while awaiting fresh fuel each morning after breakfast. Another thing to worry about. How best to approach the topic of the garden shed being unsuitable for habitation, without revealing that I'd seen its interior. Could I offer an innocent question? Perhaps. "Do you suppose it's getting chilly in Leonard's shed?" Charlotte finished her bowl of porridge, topped with cream and brown sugar, and poured herself a cup of tea. She asked did I want some. But at the same moment, my grandmother refolded her newspaper so that the front page beamed its headline again. "It is unsettling," she said, "but not surprising to hear of the strange evil of humans in our midst." She held the newspaper out and shook it gently. "As much as I understand your curiosity, I wish you had not participated quite so much in the story's action." Charlotte's head popped up from her book, alert to any wrongdoing that could be assigned to me. "Me? But What have you done now, Miss Aggie?" buzzed Charlotte. "Do not concern yourself, Charlotte." Granny Jane handed me the voice. "It is merely a lesson for Agatha." The story filled several columns and was utterly absorbing. I ignored my boiled egg and let the toast go cold. Torquay voice. "Mermaid Room Murder. Is Dancing Spinster a poisoner?" By, of course, Augustus C. Fibley. "On Saturday last, Irma Eversham, 44, widow of the esteemed Captain Giles Eversham, was taken suddenly ill in the Mermaid Dance Room at Union Street, operated by Miss Mary Ann Eversham, sister to the victim's late husband. According to the unmarried dance instructress, her sister-in-law arrived at the studio unannounced and in a state of high anxiety. "I made her a cup of tea," said Mary Ann Eversham, but she soon worsened. At the first indication of distress, a struggle for breath, the 39-year-old dancer claims that she assumed the apoplexy was due to the victim's odious habit of tight-lacing her corset. Mary Ann Eversham is well known in town as an advocate for certain female liberties, such as forsaking binding undergarments and having the right to vote in the nation's elections. The corset was not, however, the cause of Irma Eversham's trouble. As the older woman fell to the floor, Mary Ann Eversham rushed to find medical assistance, leaving her relation insensible but not yet deceased. "I knew it!" I cried. "Insensible but not yet deceased." Though even Mr. Fibley had only Miss Mary Ann's word for that. "Miss Aggie," said Charlotte sternly, "did you not bring your book this morning?" Sally pushed open the door from the kitchen. "Excuse me, madam," she said to Granny, "but Miss Graves is wanted." Charlotte took a gulp of tea and followed Sally out. I raced on. Dr. Frank Chase, the physician called upon, stated that Mary Ann Eversham expressed great alarm and urgency in her request for his attention, claiming that an illness had befallen her sister. Dr. Chase accompanied the distraught dancer and examined the patient, whereupon he pronounced life extinct, and noticed details of the woman's aspect that indicated death by poison. There was great distortion of the face and a disarrangement of her garments. No apparent loss of blood was indicated, but there was evidence and a reek of vomit. This reporter can confirm that an open box of vermirid, a common solution to domestic rodent infestation, was discovered in the mermaid room pantry. Mice have invaded many homes and establishments in Torquay as the seasonal temperatures drop. The crime scene was interrupted by Mary Ann Eversham's 11 o'clock dance students, notably Miss Agatha Caroline Morton, a 12-year-old neighbor. "Oh!" I cried, "my name!" My finger rested on the place. Miss Agatha Caroline Morton, right there in black lettering, for all of Torquay to read this morning. Under this paragraph was an illustration drawn tidily with pen and ink of a sugar bowl bearing the crest of the Royal Victoria Hotel. I, Miss Agatha Caroline Morton, had made the observation of that particular murder weapon. Well, not precisely the murder weapon, but rather the vessel for the weapon, like the holster for a gun, or the sheath to hold a knife. I read on. I'm going to sneeze. A 12-year-old neighbor of the Eversham villa on Bertram Road, first on the scene, Miss Morton spoke candidly in an interview, saying that Mr. Roddy Fuswell of the Royal Victoria Hotel had supplied the sugar bowl full of poison, and that the police would be wise to look beyond her dance teacher to find their killer. Mr. Fuswell was heard to say in Miss Morton's presence, "If I were going to kill someone, I'd do it with my bare hands." "I never accused Roddy Fuswell," I protested, even if I'd wanted to. "But I firmly believe that Miss Mary Ann is innocent." Florence Fuswell's face flushed through my mind, pasted with a ferocious scowl. I would never be able to meet her eyes again. I mentioned the sugar bowl, but I did not accuse him. I intended to be in possession of a little more evidence before I did that. "When exactly did this candid interview take place?" said Granny Jane, head tilted to one side. I had evaded that question when she'd asked in the hotel tea room. Now I had no choice but to tell the truth about Mr. Fibley appearing at the garden gate. She listened with grave attention. "I see now why he assumed such familiarity during our encounter," she said. "He twisted my words," I said. "It sounds as if I'm making a careless accusation. If Roddy Fuswell is the killer, I shall be the next victim." "And I should not fault him for it," said Granny Jane. "Having one's reputation trampled by a 12-year-old goes a long way in explaining his irritation yesterday, if the reporter provoked him with these suppositions." My pleasure at being named in the newspaper turned quickly to mortification. Not so severe, however, to stop me from reading the remainder of the news story. "Schoolgirl guessing aside, the police are conducting their inquiries under the direction of Detective Inspector Henley Locke. On the afternoon of the murder, the body of the ill-fated woman was conveyed to the mortuary at Torquay Hospital. Due to the continuing investigation, the burial of Eversham has been postponed until further notice." Granny poured a second cup of black coffee and took a sip. "It is your good fortune that I am the only person in the house who will read the story," she said, being quoted by a journalist in reference to a murder is not an accomplishment to please your mother. I looked at the page and then back to my grandmother. Can it be considered a quote if I did not say what he reports that I said? I will repeat what I said to Mr. Fusswell yesterday, said Granny Jane. Be wary to whom you speak your mind. Sally came in with the morning's post. There's one for you, Miss Agatha, she said. Marjorie! I reached for the pile. I don't think so, miss. Granny passed the letter in a creased envelope, addressed with the same precise lettering as the note I'd found at the kitchen door last night. Goodness, how I'd forgotten! Reading Mr. Fibley's story had pushed all other worries from my head. Granny watched me over the rim of her teacup. Sally moved spoons on the sideboard, her eyes on me as well. I suppose they were waiting to see who, other than Marjorie, might be my correspondent, and expected me to pick up the letter knife or warble with pleasure at receiving post. Post means mail, and warble, W-A-R-B-L-E. I know Grace will look it up, and then she'll put it on Seesaw for me, because she always does that. Anybody else want to try? Warble, W-A-R-B-L-E. Beck? Ellie? Anybody? Look it up. I put the envelope in my lap, sheltered by the tablecloth. I untucked the flap and pulled out a thin piece of paper with 7 words. Princess Pier, 3:30 o'clock. Sally straightened the silverware at Mummy's place and removed Charlotte's bowl. Sally, where is Charlotte? I come to fetch her a moment ago, miss. She's in the kitchen, outside the kitchen, really, by the gate, with that police constable. Trouble brewing, I'd say. That's the end of chapter 17. I know Ellie wants me to go ahead and read 18, don't you, Ellie? Okay. A clandestine endeavor. My neck prickled with cold. Catastrophe was moments away. Charlotte was hearing Constable Beck's account of last evening's misbehavior. Agatha? Yes, Miss Granny Jane. With enormous effort, I spoke normally. I was just thinking how much I'd like to go roller skating this afternoon. Granny raised an eyebrow, but was interrupted by Charlotte coming to the door of the breakfast room and crooking her finger at me. That's what it means to be crooking a finger. My heart turned over. I very slowly folded my serviette, thank you, Grace, that means napkin, and rose to my feet, thinking of phrases to describe Charlotte's glare. A face as dark as storm clouds, scowling like a mad dog, looking as if she might spit sparks. I briefly considered options for escape. Here goes her lovely writing. Ready? A somersault through the terrace doors to the garden where a snorting steed awaited, a swift kick to Charlotte's bottom, before fleeing through the front door, a scramble up the chimney to the roof, and a heroic use of ivy to descend on the other side. In the hallway, Charlotte's voice was fully vexed. Can you guess who has just come to speak with me? I stared in fascination at my shoe buckles, as if not meeting Charlotte's glare would cancel my transgressions. The church bell tolled as a solemn procession led the girl past a horde of onlookers to the sturdy scaffold in the village square. And yet, Charlotte's voice was unusually quiet. She was not trumpeting her indignation as she normally might, nor using Granny Jane as an ally on the topic of disobedience. Indeed, it would appear, was this possible? Charlotte was scolding her in secret? I moved my gaze from the worn carpet to Charlotte's flaming face and to her eyes, glossy with held-back tears. I nearly smiled. Charlotte, enraptured by Constable Beck, was practically confessing that she had more to hide than I did. Dare I hope that Mummy and Granny need never know about last evening? I only wanted a very small adventure. I broke into a stream of words that had been coursing along unheard for several minutes. I did not give a pen for your explanation, Miss Aggie, she whispered fiercely. You have been the cause of great indignity. Your inconsiderate disregard of good morning, ladies. Mummy appeared on the landing, hair not coiffed, but tumbling across her shoulders like that of a schoolgirl, and still wearing her pink peach silk wrap. Since the murder, Mummy had been breakfasting from a tray in her room, and we didn't see her until lunchtime. But here she was, having one of her bright days, drifting down the stairs with Tony dancing at her feet, as if content with her corner of the world. "Sweet pea," Mummy kissed me. "Let Charlotte brush your hair today, will you?" She ran a hand over my wayward curls. I nodded. "Mummy, please may I go skating on the pier this afternoon? It's ever so sunny. Charlotte's having a sulk and doesn't want to accompany me, but—" "Nonsense. Of course you'll go. You spend far too much time with your nose in a book. Fresh air will perk you up as well, Charlotte. I'm having Leonard drive me to the church directly after lunch, but he can take you in the pony cart later on. Will that suit?" Leonard. I'd meant to plead my case this morning, but daren't do it now, with Charlotte ready to pounce on my misstep. Maybe at tea time. "Yes, Mummy. Thank you, Mummy." I gotta change sides because my hand's starting to hurt on this side. See if I can get it situated. There. See if that works. Charlotte's peak crackled the air, but she said nothing, not a word. She bobbed her head and disappeared to the kitchen. I watched the door swing shut. Could my luck be so excellent? Might Charlotte be so smitten with her policeman that I would go unpunished? Mummy sailed calmly into breakfast, unaware of the nest of spiders harbored within her own household. It's referring to, actually, if we had read our myths, it's "Oh, what a tangled web we weave," which is an alliteration, not alliteration, is a saying that comes from Arachne and the spider. Arachne the spider and Athena and a myth. And when people lie or boast or don't tell the truth, they spin a web like a spider and it gets them caught in a trap, just like the spider web. So if you read what she wrote, she said, "Mummy sailed calmly into breakfast, unaware of the nest of spiders harbored within her own household." So she's referring to the fact that Charlotte's hiding things, that she likes Mr. Constable, that Aggie was hiding things about going out at night. I hurried upstairs to find woolly stockings for skating and a jacket to shield me from the wind at the seaside roller rink. I collected my writing book with the letter inside and sharpened a pencil in case I needed to make detective notes. I tucked everything into the odd-shaped case that carried my roller skates and was back in the breakfast room in fewer than 5 minutes. Mummy and Granny were still at table. "Oh, dear," said Mummy, looking up from her kipper. "Your wrists are 2 inches below your cuffs, Aggie. You are taller every day." "Even without tongue," I muttered. Remember, she refused to eat the tongue the other day. "Well, you've quite outgrown that jacket. But I like it." I tugged as if magically to lengthen the sleeves. "Your granny says we must ask poor Rose Eversham to come for tea," said Mummy, "along with this Mr. Standfast. I should never have gone anywhere so soon after Fletcher died, but we must ask nonetheless." She used the tongs to deliver a lump of sugar from the bowl to her cup. "Will we invite Miss Mary Ann as well?" Mummy stirred her tea and shook her head in answer to her question. Oh, that was... Wait, I gotta go back. Wrong voice. This is Mom asking this. Will we invite Miss Mary Ann as well?" Mummy stirred her tea, shook her head in answer to her own question. "No, I should think she'd be grateful for an hour to herself. But you'll be especially sweet with Rose, won't you, darling?" "Yes, of course, Mummy." She stirred and stirred. "And there is the small matter of etiquette," she said, "as to whether it is wise to have a possible murderess at one's table." "Mummy, Miss Mary Ann didn't do it." "I hope you're right, dear heart. I couldn't sleep at night if we learned we'd lived next door to a poisoner." The pony cart jounced so horribly that we could scarcely keep our bottoms on the seat. Leonard used a switch on Belle to make her go faster. Happily, a bone-shaking cart ride prevented Charlotte from scolding me in front of the garden boy, as Leonard had not forgiven me borrowing his bicycle. They both were grim and silent the whole way to town, as if I were to blame for all the woe in the world. Down the last hill, Belle stepped as carefully as farmer's wife over a basket of eggs, and finally here we are. The sea glittered. Unexpected sunlight rolling gently under the fishing boats in the harbor. Leonard brought Belle to a halt, and we sat for a moment, reveling in the pleasure of not being bounced like bags of potatoes. Before us, the pier stretched into the sea, an avenue that offered an array of pleasures to be found nowhere else. It always made me think of the magical, wicked place in the book called The Adventures of Pinocchio. The marionette in the story was terribly naughty, telling lies and being disobedient, despite his dream of becoming a real boy. After many misdeeds, Pinocchio and his friend arrived at a land of toys, where children were allowed to play all day long, with hoops and wooden horses, putting on plays, eating sweets, and never going to school, until being transformed into donkeys as punishment. The Princess Pier had even more amusements. Remember, she's meeting Hector here, right? And with no fear of a nasty ending, pennants snapped in the sea breeze, vendors called out from stalls selling toy watches and saltwater taffy, glass figurines and hot popped corn in paper bags. It cost a penny to look at the flea circus, and stilt walkers loped up and down with stiff knees, breathing notes from mouth organs. Remember when we looked it up, it said that it was on the coast in England, and then it said it was like a tourist town. It was a resort town. So people came there. So of course they're going to have like attractions like all these things, saltwater taffy and people on stilts and stuff to entertain people that come, because that's why people come, to be entertained, right? Couples canoodled under striped parasols. Nannies pushed pram chairs. Old gentlemen watched from wrought iron benches. The roller skating rink was my favorite of all, where I could pretend for a time to be chums with the other skaters, gliding and whooping with real people, not just with the friends I made up in my stories. Tinkling music from player pianos floated together with bird calls. It was the best place to be on a sunny afternoon. I scanned the crowd near the entrance to the Princess Pier. No sign of Hector. 2 policemen were laughing under a lamppost. Charlotte's fingers fluttered to her lips. One of them was Constable Beck. "Everybody out," said Leonard. Charlotte climbed over the side of the pony cart wearing a foolish grin. I was not eager to meet the man who had so recently seen me in my pantaloons, and oh, goodness, only a few feet beyond him there stood Hector, waving like a demented pigeon. I clambered quickly out. Leonard jiggled the reins. The cart lurched forward and away. Charlotte called, "Leonard, will you?" But he was gone. He's not very happy with Aggie, is he? I used that moment to frantically signal Hector to get out of sight, to stay close by, to wait 2 minutes. Who knows how he interpreted my finger talk, but perhaps being foreign, he was skilled at such things. Those weren't connected. Well, Constable Beck had clapped his colleague on the back and ambled over. "Isn't this a special stroke of luck?" As if he'd been given extra pudding. Fancy having the pleasure twice on one single Tuesday. Charlotte's freckled cheeks were now a sincere shade of maroon. It occurred to me that their discussion of my midnight bicycle ride may have included some kissing. "It's a pleasure to see you also, Miss Morton, by the light of day, and warmly dressed." Oh, didn't he think he was clever? I wished I were 4 years old and could kick him in the shin. "We are not yet able to laugh about that matter," said Charlotte. "Miss Aggie has not apologized for—" "Ahoy there, Aggie Morton!" Someone called out my name, followed by a gust of giggles. I had never in my life been so pleased, or pleased even a bit, actually, to see Florence Fusswell and Lavinia Payne, each carrying a pair of roller skates. But isn't Florence Fusswell Roddy's sister? And that's the one that she said she was never, ever going to be able to look at again? So I don't know why she's excited to see her, except to get out of the conversation for apologizing. But I would much rather apologize than to have to talk to Florence Fusswell whenever you accuse her brother of being the murderer, right? That's the end of chapter 18. And no, I'm not reading a third chapter. That will have to be for the next day. Bye.